We have the same issues in off-road that we have in street from a crash impact. And this is one of the things that is really should be talked about a little bit, because it's not so much about forward velocity. It has a lot to do with gravity and at the type of an impact you have. So you might think, okay, well, you see the testing standards at 7.5 meters per second or 7.75 with Snell, or 6 meters per second with DOT. You translate that over to miles per hour, it's really not that big of a deal. People are thinking, well, I ride my motorcycle a lot longer, a lot faster than that. But what we're talking about is going to absolute zero from that velocity in the test lab. And those are that 7.5 meter per second strike is a very high impact and severe impact event. And so the helmet's got to be constructed to function at that level. But we also have that same need in street, where you low side on your road racing bike in a corner, and then your suit might catch and you flip over and smack your head. Those types of impacts are going to be a little lower down that velocity range, the equivalent velocity from the lab testing. But you also want to be certain that if you crash and hit a curb, or you're hit by a car, or you hit a car, you've got to have the integrity of the shell to do the job. And that's where that 7.5 meter per second ECE test value is very important. There's been some critique that the DOT standard is not that difficult to pass. It's a relatively easy test for the manufacturers to pass. But in another regard, it's got a time attenuation component to it that the other standards don't have, and it's actually a very good standard. And balancing it with ECE, you get the high velocity of ECE at 7.5, Snell is 7.75, and with the benefits you get with the DOT testing at that little bit lower velocity. So, and again, it's just in that range up there. Those are severe impacts and severe crash impacts, and you want to make sure the helmet's shell and integrity is there to stand up to that. On the Snell side of the equation, the 2 hits in the same location requirement for the Snell certification, in our opinion, requires the helmet to be made and manufactured too stiff to give ideal brain protection and head protection to the athlete. And that's the only problem we have with the Snell standard. In fact, the ECE test at 7.5 meters per second, you know exactly where they're going to hit the helmet. So the manufacturer can strategically design the helmet to have extra strength in that area. Snell and DOT, you can hit the helmet in any location within the test line. And so our internal protocol is first strike anywhere inside the test line at 7.75 meters per second, the same as Snell, but we don't require a helmet to make that second impact in the same location. The reason for that is motorcycle helmets are single impact designs, meaning they're designed to do the job one time and then be replaced. And to hit the helmet in the same location, in the same impact at that very high velocity in a motorcycle crash is an unrealistic requirement. That requirement of their certification came from car testing, where you're strapped into a roll cage and you might hit your helmet in the same location multiple times in a rollover type crash, but it's not realistic for motorcycle. And you have that accident, the helmet's compromised, it should be replaced. We don't need to be building a helmet for a second accident in a single impact design. So that's the only reason we don't certify our helmet to Snell, because it compromises the good work we do on the lower energy requirement that we're looking for when we build a helmet. Because like I stated before, we want a helmet that's very compliant over a very broad range of energy demands without sacrificing that very high-end necessary component, but giving us what we want down low and giving us what we want on the rotational side. And the consumer out there also needs to be aware none of the testing requires any helmet manufacturers to do any low energy testing or any rotational testing. And so we go a lot deeper into the R&D process of getting numbers and a matrix of our design to work effectively for this broad range, as opposed to just going, okay, we got to meet 7.75 meters per second. That needs, we need 40 millimeters of EPS and this thickness of a shell, and go make a helmet for me. We're going a lot deeper into the science of building a better mousetrap. So the consumer needs to be aware of what's going on with the certification standards in their helmets. And nobody's ever really looked behind the curtain before. The Snell Memorial Foundation has been out there with a standard in the United States for many years, and it's been marketed from their company that you need to have a Snell approved helmet because it's the best. And but nobody's really gone back and said, well, what is required by that standard? What does the helmet have to meet? The DOT standard has generally been accepted as a pretty easy standard to pass, but it's got some very unique merit to it about time that's involved in the dwell time of the impacts, if you will. And then there's the European standard that is accepted in 47 countries worldwide that has its own shortcomings. It doesn't have a penetration test. The Snell test does, the DOT test does. They're actually identical. But the ECE test does not. So you can have some radical venting in an ECE approved helmet that might get through, but you could get a foot peg or a lever to penetrate that portion of the helmet in the very wrong accident that could be a problem. So you've got to be really conscious of that, because by now, after 3 years of selling motocross helmets, we've seen all kinds of accidents and torn up helmets coming back in. And I can assure you, you want a shell that's got enough integrity to stop things from getting through it. So also on the ECE, like I mentioned before, the manufacturer knows where the impact sites are going to be. So the strategic design of the shell, the layup of the shell, these things can be manipulated to be effective in those areas. But, and I'm not insinuating that everybody's not out there trying to build the best product, but you know where they're going to impact your helmet, and you can build strategically to that. So in our feeling, a combination of the ECE test for high velocity impacts, it's almost identical to Snell's 7.5 meters per second versus 7.75, with the DOT standard where you can hit it anywhere above the test line on the helmet, and the helmet's got to do its job. So that combination to us makes very good sense. The Snell standard requires 2 hits in the same location at very high velocity. And that single component of the Snell test, we feel, requires the helmet to become too stiff. And there's many other helmet experts that have that same belief also. When you're building a helmet, obviously you want to build a helmet that's going to give you that high-end protection for that severe type accident, and obviously we're doing that in every case with our products. But we also want to build a helmet that's effective in managing energy down in the lower ranges of energy management, like we've talked about. So the standards, I would encourage the consumer to do a little bit more homework and educate themselves on what the standards actually are and why they're important. So I think the takeaway is, one, the consumer needs to educate himself on what helmets really need to do and why they do it and how they do it. Our system, omnidirectional suspension, allows 3-dimensional displacement. Nobody else has this technology. We have a superior helmet when it comes to managing energy transfer to the brain in the event of an impact. And it's basically that simple today.